Hi folks, you're with Tassivs today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the ramifications of a substantially reduced wheat or grain harvest in Russia and the Ukraine, due to the, ostensibly at least, due to the conflict, or due to various embargoes and trade restrictions, things like that are placed on Russia. Now, there's little doubt, I think, that the globalists have engineered this confrontation. They've been provoking Putin for years and getting in his face, hoping that he'll do something like this. And then, you saw it all across the news and the White House spokespeople. Their glee when Putin finally ran out of patience and decided to pursue a military solution, given that all the others had been exhausted. I'm not saying that was the right thing to do. The people talking is infinitely better than people shooting, but it's not hard to see how the West, how the United States in particular, orchestrated this thing and kept on pushing him to and hoping that he would do it, which he finally did. So, and then they can run around and say, Putin's Hitler, and the normal stuff. So now Ukraine's quite a substantial wheat producer, and Russia does a bit of wheat as well. So Russia also does fertilizer. It's not as much. They make out that Russia pretty much makes all the world's fertilizers. That's bullshit. It's less than 10% of the world's fertilizer comes from Russia, as I understand it, at least. But looking at the countries that are buying the grain from Ukraine and Russia, they're not exclusively, but primarily dirt poor third world basket case countries. And the grain isn't necessarily for human consumption. It may be for maintenance of herds of livestock, for example. So the effect of a substantially reduced grain exports to these, or their receipts of receiving grain in, assuming no other sources can be found, that's going to have quite an effect. So for example, places like Pakistan and Bangladesh and Indonesia, now just in those three countries alone, we're pushing a population of 700 odd million peasant people there. Now the rich people can always go to their waterfront properties in some Western first world country, so they're not going to be affected. But the poor people that make up 99.75% or something of the population, they're all going to suffer to varying degrees. Now, if you look at the other countries that are also in permanent social turmoil, like around Sudan and Ethiopia, whether it's civil war or they've had a recent population explosion, due to United Nations supply of food and medicine or something like that, and then they're right back to where they were, desperately trying to find enough food to eat, and people dying like flies. Now, I've been through some of these third world countries, and the first time you go there. And these aren't the tourist areas but as soon as you go there and you see the poverty and the dead bodies in the street and the starving, handicapped people and so on, it's quite a shock. In fact, the first few times I saw, I had trouble not puking. It was that shocking to see these things that you would never see in a first world country. Never. You can't even conceive of it in a first world country. And if you think of sort of your worst imagination in terms of poverty and starvation and physical handicaps due to inbreeding, things like that, if you think of your worst image that you can conjure up in your head, then what I've seen is worse than that. So what happens when? And there's more than my guess is around 1.3 billion peasants are dependent on, in varying degrees, dependent on Russian, Ukrainian wheat or grain, primarily wheat, but grain. Now, if the grain supply is particularly disrupted, if you look at the other sources of grain in the world, then it's not really enough to make it up without some decent rationing. or the first world countries have to give up their grain or a portion of it at the very least, and then send that off to these third world countries who can't really afford, the top quality grains anyway. So that means they'll have to be gifted these grains. So the benefit of going, provoking Russia like this and having this fallout is it's become more expensive for everyone in the West, and yet it's achieved nothing in terms of bringing the Russian government to become good globalist flunky stooges. And why should it, by the way? They're a sovereign nation. They have and are and will and should tell the globalists to fuck off. But that aside, the fallout, the fallout's already in play. So that's, realistically, that's the issue. So these dirt poor peasant countries, there's going to be tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of peasants that are going to be very hungry. And where are they going to go? Are they going to go to the nearest nation and are United Nations camps and food supplies going to be opened up there? Some of these people won't eat other diets, so you can't sort of say to them, "Oh, you have to eat this instead of that." That's unlikely to really work. So they're very fixed in their ways, some of these peasants, and some of them have very religious, pious affiliations with their diet and that sort of thing. So the temptation for the globalists is going to be overwhelming to say, gee whiz, we can throw another 10, 20, 30, 40 million or whatever peasants, illiterate third world peasants, into the West. And let's do the propaganda thing now. Hey, Billy Bob, have you got a picture of a few dead young peasant girls and some of these? Yeah, you can. Okay, look, just address them in pink, and I want to see a crying woman next to it. What can we get the mother? Mother's already dead. Doesn't matter. Find another woman. Anyway, get her to cry into the camera with the little girl in pink. Now, Jane, can you do build a narrative around this, that the little girl would have become a lesbian if she wanted to be a doctor or an astronaut in the West, and was denied that by the evil Hitler Putin, who personally stopped this little black lesbian from becoming a fucking astronaut. Gin that up as much as you can. Don't forget the pink. Got to have the pink there, and the crying mother, the crying woman who we can pretend is the mother. So let's get a lot of those images. Dead children, crying woman, that sort of thing. Don't forget the pink. I've already said that. The pink, very important to have the pink. And it has to be a little girl. No little boys. No, come on, misogyny. We have to have a little girl here for this. All right, let's run with that narrative. Let's run that in all the media, the mainstream media, and then let's tell the population that if we've got to bring these people in. Look at these starving little girls, little babies, little tiny babies are dying. And if you've got a problem and you want to stop these people from coming in, you fascist Nazi Hitler. And in that way, they can bring in millions of people to the West, and millions of these peasants using all sorts of emotional blackmail and so on and so forth. If we look at Boris Johnson's recent speech, and this was only a week or so ago, and go to there's a good channel in England to cover some good stuff, and it's called We Got a Problem, or You Got a Problem. I think it's it's an English guy, and he'd had the Prime Minister of England, Boris Johnson's speech there, where Boris was skiting, boasting about all the people from around the world he'd brought into England without the consent of the British people, that's been forced on them. And he was skiting about as if he's some fucking towering moral giant for doing these things. We owe these people debts of honour. He talks about honour when he can't even do what he was elected to do, and he talks about honour. I mean, the chutzpah of this dude. It goes to show he's just a globalist flunky stooge, but nonetheless, this is going to be, I would suspect, it's going to be a trigger and excuse to bring bring people in. They may try the temporary visa thing. We have to bring in women and children. We have to. We can't let them die. And if anyone disagrees with it, they're Hitler. So they'll try that, and then these people end up staying, and then they can send for other relatives to come over and that sort of thing. So they might go down that path. But I've no doubt they'll try and use this as a trigger to bring yet more black, brown peasants and stuff them into the Western economies. And one wonders if this was the intention at the outset, so they can kill two birds with one stone, as it were. They can nobble Vladimir Putin and Russia, and hopefully bring him, as they would see it, hopefully bring him down so they can bring Russia into the globalist system, which they very much want to do. They're annoyed and outraged that Putin has stayed outside of the system, and so he should. And then on the other hand, that they can use then the food shortages around the world to bring more peasants into the West. The other option they've got is to send Western food. Australia is self-sufficient a lot, not grain. Australia buys grain from Canada, for example, but Australia is self-sufficient in many foods, and wouldn't really be. It'd be affected, but not particularly affected by this. But what if the globalists agree, and Australia, like all the West, there's no sovereign government here that represents the people. What if the globalists agree? Well, why don't we take food from the Western economies and put people on rationing there, which with COVID vaccines and masks will be a way of keeping them under control, of training them to be obedient serfs and plebeians, in the new aristocratic order that the globalists are trying to enforce on us. So they may go down that path. Either one is probably attracted to them. They can increase their social control, apparatus and machinery. And we've seen, recently during the COVID stuff, just how many two-bit public servants get off on the power. They almost ejaculate into the camera as they're talking about how many, you've got to wear your masks, you've got to do this, that. And so this is something I think they would happily go back to. So we'll have to do food rationing because we have to protect those little babies, little brown babies there with the pink clothes, little girls, and so we have to protect them by sending the food away, which means we have to control you. And there's a higher moral purpose here. And all you plebeians and serfs and ferals, you just don't understand the higher moral sort of question here. So we're just going to have to use the police force and the army and banks and the public service. And we're going to use everything we've got to control you. And if you complain about it, we'll put you in prison arbitrarily if we have to. I mean, the rule of law, that just gets in the way of the globalist project. Who gives a fuck about that? We've got January 6th of the precedent now. We can just throw you in prison on some vague, bullshit charge, suspend habeas corpus, and leave you there for 12 months plus while we think about what we're going to do with you. And if you argue about it or you give us any trouble, then we'll stick you in solitary for 12 months, and there's not a damn fucking thing you can do about it. So I think it could play out in any of those directions, but that's my take on what the possibilities are. Let's hope that it all blows over and becomes a relative storm in a teacup, although I don't think so. The globalists will be savouring this crisis they've manufactured, and they won't want to let it go to waste, and they'll want to use it to further the globalist project in some way. You've been with Tacitus today at your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.